2012 by Dave DeCash. Whose desired outcomes becomes highly problematic to define overall, as it quickly becomes an issue of outcomes overall in and of itself. For example, the elite 1% who live in vast opulence and luxury beyond imagination, those desirable outcomes for them, they may have entirely different outcomes in mind than, say, the desired outcomes for the 99%, who may be plunged down to live in abject poverty, starvation, living in extreme need, or even in debilitating impoverishment and misery for the rest of their lives, albeit however short. Now, these endogenous variables can be controllable at certain points, but then they turn into endogenous variables in which there is no control, no respite, no going back. Now I give you this alarming account of the looming great economic collapse of the United States of America. This is part 3, Economic Tsunami. It's an institutional collapse. Permanent externalities. These deleterious negative externalities can elicit a wide-scale devastation across the face of the globe, and as in the case of climate change, once these exogenous variables take hold, there's no stopping them. The upcoming global economic superstorm is being regarded as scientifically accepted classic. It's changed the way people think about the true nature of the economic and recessionary changes which we are now going through. We now have copies available for the first time, a true collector's item. Don't miss out on this important book. Your future may depend on it. Certain events occur once in a generation, and these internal and external variables are inculcated in our very institutional structure. Some are internal or endogenous variables and can be easily modified in most cases, or easily changed and manipulated to suit desired outcomes for the times. Whose desired outcomes becomes highly problematic to define overall, as it quickly becomes an issue of outcomes overall in and of itself. It's generally at the higher levels of corporate echelons as well as governmental regulations. And as with climate change, right now we're experiencing the worst drought since the Great Depression.
Yeah, so that's about 800 mils. So this should put it around 1100 milliliters. Let's see what happens here.
Yes, now the economic tsunami, the institutional collapse is indeed arriving daily. Of course, everybody can feel it, a certain unease in the air, a certain feeling of malaise generally at the higher levels of corporate echelons as well as governmental regulations. Free market allocation of scarce natural resources, of course, is notoriously inefficient, tending to undervalue these resources that we all take for granted, such as water and clean air. That's why governmental regulation is required to help ameliorate these market failures. Granted, the monopolistic predator cares little about polluting the river, dumping in dioxins and other deleterious chemicals in order for short-term profit. That is greed, pure and simple. As we can see from nature, what's going on in Kentucky, Iowa, several parts of the Midwest, it's devastating. Indeed, payback is a bitch, and we've only begun to pay. Of course, that's with the climate change induced in 2012. The tragedies of drought and wildfires are upon ourselves. In fact, drought was among the first consequences of global climate change that scientists predicted when they officially went on record on the subject in 1983. Carbon dioxide emissions, primarily from burning fossil fuels such as coal, oil, and natural gas, were building up in the Earth's atmosphere, trapping heat like greenhouse roofs do. That said, scientists from the National Academy of Sciences, NAS, and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, would warn the planet and this would lead to climate extremes. Of course, you saw conservative think tanks and monopolistic predators gladly fund opposing studies, even though over 100 scientists in the National Academy of Sciences all signed a letter stating that, in fact, climate change was indeed a reality. The two bodies, the EPA and the NAS, issued separate reports that year in 1983. The academies provided a comprehensive review of the effects of human-caused increases in the levels of atmospheric CO2. The EPA reviewed previous scientific findings on the greenhouse effect, even. Reporting on the EPA document in October 1983, the New York Times environmental reporter Philip Shabrakoff quoted EPA Director of Strategic Studies John S. Hoffman: "The projected average temperature changes do not necessarily reflect the disruptive effects of wide seasonal swings that could bring extremes of heat or drought or rainfall." In the 29 intervening years, study after study, not to mention daily human experience, have built up the scientific foundations that the NAS and the EPA laid in the early days of the Reagan Revolution. The most recent is a paper titled "Perception of Climate Change," published in August in the journal Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, PNAS. Study authors, led by NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies head James Hansen, compared summer and winter temperatures from 1951 to 1980 with the 3 decades since. The base period had conditions resembling those of the Holocene, or the world in which civilization developed. The report says the last 3 decades have brought a rapid global warming period. Now, what does this mean for you? Summer times are going to be extremely hot, especially for outliers. New Zealand, Australia, you can't even go outside without covering up because of holes in the ozone. Anomalies that are more than 3 standard deviations warmer than the climatology of the base period are now present. Over these past 30 years, they've done nothing. Indeed, the global collapse is coming at an unprecedented rate. You see crop failures. You see the price of corn tripling. And it's so bad, in fact, that all the farmers in America have to slaughter their hogs and cows because they can no longer afford the corn silage to feed them. In the third world, it's even more deleterious in terms of human costs. Grain shipments that were entitled to starving third world countries such as Ethiopia and sub-Saharan Africa are now being diverted willfully to feed cattle in feedlots. Because of the more expensive price of corn, grain is diverted from third world countries and human consumption, bringing about a massive famine, wide scale, with unknown casualties. Of course, you won't hear this on the nightly news, so do get the book. Your water and your climate are very important. Wildfires have ravaged Colorado in consuming over 20,000 square miles in the Cache la Poudre. It's a designated scenic wild river, one of only a few in America. Not to mention there's wildfires that are streaming out of control in New Mexico, California, firestorms, lack of water, food diversion from third world human consumption to cattle in the second and first worlds. It's an amazing institutional collapse of unprecedented proportions. Get your book as soon as you can, because you'll need to know more.